Jessica Roitman, welcome to VU, to the Faculty of Religion and Theology. It's great to have you on board as part of it. It's actually, just to start here, it's a long-standing wish to have a professor in Jewish studies in our faculty. And for our former students, our alumni, for our present students, for many people, this was already a wish that was shared by many. So it's great to have you here. Now, great to have this opportunity to get to know you a bit better and some questions in that respect. Let me just start with a more general question. Would you say is the importance of your chair in relation to the Jewish history of Amsterdam?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ruard, for the invitation to talk with you and with the alumni, and of course, for being named chair. It's been a wonderful, warm welcome, even via Afstand, only via screens. But I look forward to working with all my new colleagues in the fall, hopefully at least a bit in person. But the importance for the chair in relation to the Jewish history of Amsterdam, in all sorts of ways. I mean, the chair was set up to look at the history and culture of the Jews in the Netherlands. And of course, for the Jewish community in the Netherlands, it was centered certainly at the beginning of openly Jewish settlement, or resettlement, if you will, in the very late 16th and early 17th centuries in Amsterdam. And my own early research, my dissertation research at the University of Leiden, and the book that came out of that looked at Jews in this very early period in Amsterdam. Looked at how they set up their own Jewish community with the structures provided by the city of Amsterdam. Throughout the 17th century, of course, Amsterdam receives Ashkenazi, so Jews from Eastern Central Europe, refugees, and it really becomes the center not only of Jewish life in the Netherlands, or the Low Countries, Dutch Republic, whatever you want to call it at the time, but also becomes a real center of Jewish life in Europe and even globally, as particularly Portuguese Jews, Sephardic Jews, engage in global trade networks that align alongside the expanding Dutch global trade networks. But of course, it's not just trade. Amsterdam becomes the center of the Jewish book publishing industry, a Jewish seminary set up, and that's continued really to this day. But one thing I want to emphasize, both for my chair and just when I talk about the Jewish community in the Netherlands, the history and culture, is that of course it's not just Amsterdam. There's vital, thriving communities beginning in the 17th and 18th century throughout what we now call the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic, and throughout the Low Countries. So while my own research has centered very much on Jews in Amsterdam, and later as part of a global empire that is in a lot of ways based in Amsterdam, Jewish life in the Netherlands or the Low Countries certainly is not only in Amsterdam. And for a diasporic group, it doesn't behoove us to look only at a community in one city, however important it is.
Yeah. Now your work has definitely broadened from there, and but just from the start, locating it in Amsterdam is also, I think, an important aspect of the chair as such, being established with support from the Amsterdam City Council, in collaboration with the University of Amsterdam and the Jewish Historical Museum. So in that sense, it's really also located. But you already mentioned the broad global network, basically, in which it was historically already grounded. And a lot of your work has actually also focused on the Jewish community and Jewish history in the Caribbean part of the kingdom. Can you say a bit more about that? How is it a large community? Has been central to those local histories as well?
Yeah, I mean, my own research came about in a roundabout way as these things tended to happen as academic careers go. The Jewish community in the Caribbean is a diverse one. One thing that's fascinated me about it is because I've been very interested in encounter and entanglement, as well as challenging traditional or conventional ways of looking at things. And I think all these come together when you look at the study of Jews in the Caribbean. In terms of Dutch history, well, the real center of Caribbean Jewry is actually in the Dutch colonies, particularly Curacao, former colonies, Suriname, St. Eustatius till about the end of the 18th century. And I think that tends to get forgotten. People tend to, and this is because of the sources they look at Jews and mostly really the British colonies. But if you look at centers of Jewish communal life in the Caribbean, and then the Caribbean as a center point at that time for the early Americas, it's the Dutch colonies where anywhere from a half to a third of the white population are actually Jewish in the latter part of the 18th century in Suriname.
Right.
You have rabbis being trained there. You have things like kosher meat being verified in Curacao rather than New York. I think this helps decenter, and this is me coming as an American from a very American perspective, with the idea that North America is the center of everything. And when you look at early American life writ large, but particularly early American Jewish life, it's really the Caribbean, and more particularly the Dutch Caribbean, that's actually the center of Jewish life till about the mid 19th century. So I enjoy that kind of, in Dutch, the eigenwijs, the sort of counter narrative that provides.
I'm so happy to hear more about that. I grew up as a child partly in Suriname, and I've since visited all the Dutch islands in the Caribbean. So Mistatia also being the first foreign state basically to accept the American the establishment of the American state. But and that's just all these kind of interesting connections. But to hear the histories behind the synagogues and the presence that you can actually see in the Caribbean is quite interesting. Now you also speak about this decentering, and of course decentering is a term that's very pertinent to contemporary discussions, mostly about decolonization, about reflecting on our past, and so on. What would this study and the research that you are doing, how could that help us to achieve a kind of honest decentering?
Yeah, in all sorts of ways. I mean, when I'm looking particularly at the history of Jews in the Caribbean, for instance, I mentioned entanglement, encounter, those things that fascinate me, decentering. Again, coming from this American perspective, because I like to look at relations between people, particularly so-called minority groups. When you look at Black Jewish relations, it's been very much through this lens of either conflict or cooperation, really 20th century US civil rights history. If we start looking at the Caribbean, where Black and Jewish diasporic histories have been entangled since 1492, basically, I think it helps us look at things in a different way. Beyond this one model of how groups can interact. It's a much more nuanced, it's a much more complicated way, where you have Jews very unfortunately engaged in the traffic and enslaved Africans. But you also have people of color becoming in Suriname part of normative Judaism, which you don't see anywhere else really in the world until the 20th century. That's happening in the 18th century. So it helps us as a lens to challenge the way we look at very important things, such as race relations, either between Black and Jews or just other people. It helps us look at those things in a different way or with a new light. And I think that overall brings us to this issue of decolonizing history, which seems ubiquitous today. There's really, really interesting conversations taking place that urge us to diversify and rethink how history is taught and how we understand it. But unfortunately, I don't think any of us are really always very clear. I know I'm not completely on what decolonizing it actually means. And I tend to think we get really focused on issues of, okay, what are we adding to the curriculum? We were having these discussions in the faculty right now. What are our reading lists? What scholars are we including or not including? And that's really important, I think. I find it important and a challenge to my own work. But what I struggle with and what I want to challenge myself to do is to keep thinking beyond that and thinking, what does it really mean about the focus of the histories we're writing? how we're understanding the power structures, received wisdom, disciplinary reference points. It becomes a bit overwhelming, but I think it's really important work.
Why is this process so pertinent to us today?
I think it's really important, well, for historians, for everyone really, and I think we've seen that with a lot of the protest movements going on, where we're really challenged to think about how we're understanding things, like at a basic, almost epistemological level. How do we know what we know? How are we understanding things? How are we viewing interactions and entanglements between people? How are we understanding our own pasts?
Is it primarily a matter of social justice, or is it primarily a matter of, let's say, epistemic honesty?
I think it depends, of course, on the person. For me, social justice is a goal we're all aspiring to, and hopefully inspired by, and that is emerging from how we're taught, and how we think about our pasts, how we understand ourselves in relationship to others and around the world. And I mean, that's something that is happening particularly in my home country of the US, but I've lived in the Netherlands for 20 years, and it's been very interesting seeing that start to happen here as well.
Yeah. Do you think we are honest enough about our ambiguous history?
You know, as I said, I've lived here 20 years. I did my PhD at the University of Leiden. Finished that, seems like quite a long time ago, about 12 years ago. And I've seen a lot of movement. I've seen a lot of change in how Dutch people in general, Dutch popular culture, but also the Dutch Academy is approaching its history, its background. What I do think is interesting is that because of the history of racialized slavery in the United States, we have been in the US able to talk, maybe haltingly, about race apart from empire, although there's very interesting work done linking race and empire and American informal empire. Well, has struck me as something that's been much harder for Dutch historians, for people in the Netherlands to do, because
of our history of empire.
Because of the history, it's been until the decolonization period, because the mass migrations, after World War II, non-white people have mostly been over there. Of course, there's been exceptions, but really being confronted with people of another race, however you want to define that, has mostly been in the overseas colonies, far away. So there's been a tendency, I think, to assume that race isn't relevant to one's research. And if you're teaching, for instance, the Golden Age, now this new exhibition at the Rijksmuseum is challenging us to think about that in new ways, happily. But a lot of that challenging has been coming the last 5 years. Certainly when I came, it was more, hey, you're doing Dutch Golden Age history, race doesn't matter, really. Only if you're doing all that stuff overseas. And I think that's...
So maybe the work's only just starting. And
absolutely. And I've been really so pleased by seeing all the super interesting work being done by historians. I'm thinking of Gloria Wecker, whose work came out a couple of years ago, this Rijksmuseum exhibition coming up. I really think there has been a sort of sea change in the work academics here are doing, and I do think that will have a knock-on effect.
Thanks, Jessica.
All right.
For this introduction and for your also the promising words that you're speaking, because with your work you are definitely also embarking on that same avenue, and helping us as a faculty to reflect on that past as well. So thanks for all that, and we hope you have a very fruitful time in our midst, and we will learn a lot with you and from you.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.